In the Middle Ages, mosquitoes were a serious nuisance. Peasants had no chemical sprays, no nets, and no simple way to stop them. But they were resourceful and learned how to fight back in their own creative ways, even if those methods would seem strange today. Life for medieval peasants was anything but clean or comfortable. Their homes were small, often just a single room with dirt floors that turned muddy whenever it rained. Chickens wandered freely, not as pets, but as part of daily survival, sometimes even laying eggs right on the bedding. Baths were rare events, maybe every few months or, for some, only once a year. The best medical advice of the time was basically, avoid bathing, stay healthy, which says a lot about the state of medieval science. The result was an odor strong enough to make anyone from the modern world wince. Clothes were hardly ever washed, absorbing months of sweat, cooking smoke, and grime. If a medieval farmer walked into a modern shopping mall, people would run for the exits faster than if someone reheated fish in the office microwave. Oddly enough, that terrible smell turned out to be useful. The stench of unwashed bodies, mixed with sweat, dirt, and natural oils, made it harder for mosquitoes to detect human scent. It did not completely repel them, but it confused their senses enough to make peasants slightly safer. Being smelly worked as a kind of accidental mosquito repellent. Their diet helped too. Peasants ate plenty of garlic, onions, and leeks. Their meals might not have been exciting, but their body chemistry became a natural deterrent to bugs. Garlic and similar foods contain sulfur compounds that come out through sweat, creating a smell mosquitoes dislike. Modern studies even show that people who eat garlic regularly get about 18% fewer mosquito bites than those who do not. Medieval peasants might not have understood the science, but they figured out through experience that certain foods made them less tempting to insects. Of course, nothing came without a downside. While body odor and garlic sweat kept mosquitoes away, they attracted lice and fleas. Peasants ended up trading one set of biting pests for another, gaining constant itching as part of the deal. Children often suffered the most. Their naturally sweeter body chemistry draws more mosquitoes than adults, a fact that still holds true today. Parents sometimes rubbed garlic directly on their children's skin before they went out to work in the fields. It was not exactly affectionate, but it was protective. Interestingly, modern mosquito repellents work on similar principles. We have replaced the medieval 6 months without a bath technique with pleasant lemon or eucalyptus scents, which is definite progress. Still, the old ideas laid the groundwork for the repellents we use today. When the natural smell and garlic defense were not enough, peasants relied on smoke. They discovered that heavy smoke drove mosquitoes away faster than any other method. Medieval houses had central fire pits with a single hole in the roof for ventilation, so the constant haze served a dual purpose. Sleeping in those homes meant choosing between suffocating in smoke or being eaten alive by insects. To create more smoke, peasants burned whatever they could find: damp leaves, wet wood, and even animal dung. In the north, people used peat moss, while those in the south burned herbs like rosemary and lavender. Smoke worked because mosquitoes breathe through delicate tubes that are easily irritated by particles in the air. It also disrupted their ability to follow human breath and body scent. In fields and outdoor work areas, peasants built smoky fires at dusk, creating safe zones where they could labor without being swarmed. These smoky, smelly, and smoky strategies might seem unpleasant today, but they show how well medieval people adapted to their environment. Without modern technology, they managed to find their own ways to survive nights filled with buzzing wings and itchy bites. Dinner conversations in smoky huts often went something like this: "How's the stew?" Cough. "Delicious." Cough. "What?" Cough. I said, "Cough, cough." Never mind. It was not exactly peaceful dining. Still, modern studies confirm that smoke can cut mosquito activity by about 70% in closed spaces. The problem, of course, was that humans had to breathe it too. Medieval peasants suffered from watery eyes, constant coughing, and long-term lung problems. The average person probably inhaled the smoke equivalent of 20 cigarettes a day just by sitting near the family fire. Some people tried to minimize the damage by planning ahead. They would fill their homes with smoke before bedtime to drive insects out, then let the air clear a little before sleeping. Others figured out that sleeping higher helped, since smoke rises. In swampy regions, families kept fires burning slowly all night, taking turns adding damp fuel to keep the insects away. The nightly choice was simple but harsh. Get bitten or breathe smoke until your lungs hurt. Medieval mosquito control often came down to choosing between bites or becoming smoked like bacon. Smoke helped, but did not solve the problem. People still needed a cleaner, longer-lasting fix. Over time, peasants began to notice a pattern. Mosquitoes always seemed worse after heavy rainfall and nearly disappeared in dry weather. They could not explain the science, but they saw that still water brought the biting insects. Villages built near rivers and marshes suffered most as the damp conditions created perfect breeding zones. A puddle the size of a dinner plate could produce hundreds of new mosquitoes in only a few days. While no one understood mosquito life cycles, they knew that stagnant water meant trouble. The solution they found was surprisingly effective: get rid of the water. Peasants began digging simple drainage trenches to carry water away from homes and meeting areas. These ditches were not precise or decorative. They were carved with wooden shovels, crude tools, or sometimes just bare hands. In hard clay soils, this work was exhausting. If I had to do it while wearing stiff cowhide shoes, I might have accepted the bites instead. As the system grew, villages developed small networks of trenches and channels. Older residents often knew exactly where every ditch flowed, keeping a mental map of the hidden waterways underfoot. During rainy seasons, clearing and maintaining these trenches became a shared responsibility, with families taking turns to make sure nothing got blocked. In places where draining water was impossible, people filled low areas with rocks, broken pottery, scraps of wood, and packed earth. The goal was to remove any puddle that lasted more than a couple of days. This method worked especially well on village paths and courtyards, where foot traffic helped compress the fill and keep it firm. Water storage was another tricky issue. Villagers needed barrels to collect rainwater, but open containers turned into mosquito nurseries. Some clever souls covered their barrels with cloth or scattered dried herbs across the surface to block insects. Others discovered an even smarter trick: adding a thin layer of cooking oil to the water. The film prevented mosquitoes from laying eggs while keeping the water usable. It is worth remembering just how fast the problem could grow. One female mosquito can lay up to 300 eggs at a time, and those can hatch in less than 2 days. A single forgotten puddle could produce thousands of mosquitoes within a week. Villages that ignored water control faced swarms so thick that people struggled to work outdoors. To prevent this, children were often tasked with checking the area around their homes for any standing water. They would overturn pots, scrape out puddles from tree stumps, and smooth over dips in the ground. It was the medieval version of mosquito patrol, and no child liked it. "Why me? I did it yesterday," probably echoed across villages, just as it does when kids today complain about chores. Some communities went a step further, reshaping their surroundings to control drainage. They slightly raised the paths between homes and sloped the ground in shared spaces so rainwater would flow away. In wetter regions, people built shallow stone-lined gutters that carried runoff into streams or away from buildings altogether. Villages near ponds or wells found additional ways to reduce mosquito breeding. They cleared vegetation from the edges of ponds so the insects had fewer sheltered places to lay eggs. Wells were kept tightly covered, with small channels dug around their bases to ensure no water pooled nearby. Over time, these local innovations made a big difference. By paying attention to nature and working together, medieval peasants created surprisingly effective mosquito control without knowing anything about germs or insect biology. Their mix of smoke, drainage, and clever observation laid the groundwork for environmental mosquito control methods still used centuries later. Some medieval communities learned that introducing certain fish into ponds and streams reduced mosquito numbers. They did not know the science, but they observed that water with fish had fewer insects hovering above it. In southern Europe, people even placed tiny fish similar to minnows in water storage tanks to keep them clean of the squirming mosquito larvae. Livestock also played an unexpected part in mosquito control. Farm animals attract mosquitoes in large numbers, so placing pens and stables farther from homes helped steer the insects away from people. Over time, this practice influenced the way entire villages were laid out. More organized settlement planning kept animals at the outskirts and people in the center, creating a natural buffer zone. Gardens helped too, even if by accident. Many of the herbs grown for daily cooking or simple medicine naturally repelled insects. When planted around doors and windows, these herbs formed a fragrant defense line that mosquitoes disliked crossing. Without understanding insect behavior, medieval people still managed to cut local mosquito populations dramatically, sometimes by half or more. Environmental control worked well, but peasants still needed personal protection during the most active mosquito hours, especially around dawn and dusk. That is where plants became their next line of defense. They discovered through observation that some herbs and flowers discouraged mosquitoes from coming too close. Medieval gardens were not planted for beauty. They were small, practical patches where every plant had a specific use. Among the vegetables and medicinal herbs grew several species chosen specifically for keeping insects away. Lavender was one of the favorites. Its soft purple blooms added rare color to the gray tones of mud walls and straw roofs. The strong floral scent masked the human smells that draw mosquitoes, making homes surrounded by lavender far more comfortable. Mint was another must-have. It was used for flavoring food and freshening breath, but it also worked as a simple insect repellent. The menthol it contains irritates mosquitoes, so peasants crushed the leaves and rubbed them on their arms and necks before going outside. This wild mint spread quickly and needed almost no care, which made it perfect for medieval gardeners who did not always have time to pamper plants. Another potent defender was wormwood. This bitter, silvery green herb produced a sharp scent that mosquitoes could not stand. Villagers sometimes planted entire patches of wormwood near meeting areas so that anyone could break off a piece to wave while chatting outdoors. The smell was far from pleasant to humans, but it kept insects at bay better than most other plants. Tansy, known for its bright yellow flowers that looked like tiny buttons, was another garden staple. Its leaves contain compounds that interfere with how mosquitoes track their prey. Peasants grew tansy near doors, windows, and livestock pens to form a living shield against buzzing pests. The combination of plants worked even better than using them alone. A typical cottage might have lavender near the doorway, mint growing by the kitchen, wormwood along the fence, and tansy under windows. Together, they created a network of scents mosquitoes tried to avoid. Modern experiments confirm that essential oils from these plants can cut mosquito landings by nearly 50%. Medieval villagers did not know the chemistry, but generations of practice taught them exactly which plants worked best. Basil added another layer of protection. While treasured for flavoring stews and sauces, it also kept insects away, especially when the leaves began to dry out a little. In the warm months, many households left pots of basil by their windows to discourage mosquitoes from flying indoors. Keeping the plant alive but slightly wilted was common advice, and ironically, that describes how most of my houseplants look today. Finally, marigolds added both beauty and purpose. Their bright orange and yellow blooms stood out vividly among the greens and browns of medieval gardens. Yet they were not simply for decoration. Marigolds release a natural compound with a sharp scent that confuses and repels mosquitoes. Villagers often lined pathways and garden edges with them to form cheerful but effective barriers against the constant buzzing of insects. These plant-based defenses, along with careful drainage and clever water management, gave medieval peasants an impressive toolkit for keeping mosquitoes in check. They did it all without science, modern sprays, or even understanding why it worked. Just centuries of observation, shared knowledge, and the determination to sleep through the night without being bitten to pieces. Marigolds contain a natural compound called pyrethrum, which is still used in insect repellents today. Medieval gardeners noticed that these bright flowers seemed to drive mosquitoes away. When mosquito infestations became unbearable, people sometimes filled small cloth pouches with dried herbs that repelled insects and wore them around their necks or tied them near their beds. The success of these herbal methods varied greatly depending on the season and freshness of the plants. Freshly crushed leaves worked far better than entire uncrushed plants. No single herb provided complete protection from bites. It was the combination of scents and oils that created an environment mosquitoes disliked. Yet, even with these plants guarding their homes, peasants working in distant fields had no such defense. For those long days outdoors, another form of protection was necessary. When herbs fell short, clothing became the final weapon in the medieval fight against mosquitoes. Summer fashion in medieval Europe was not about showing off a suntan. It was about covering every inch of skin to avoid turning into an insect buffet. This was not merely due to modesty. After years of itchy bites, people learned that exposed skin was simply an invitation for mosquitoes. During peak mosquito months, peasants changed their clothing style to reduce bites. They wore loose linen shirts with long sleeves, even in the heat. The fabric, woven from flax fibers, created a thin but effective barrier that made it hard for mosquitoes to reach the skin. Layering was common, not for looks, but for survival. Their daily catwalk was a muddy road, and their prize was escaping bites, not applause. Working long hours in the summer heat while wearing multiple layers was miserable. Sweat poured down their backs, and clothes stuck to their skin, but the alternative was being covered in painful, itchy welts. Medieval life often came down to a simple choice: be drenched in sweat or become mosquito food. As the sun set and mosquitoes grew more aggressive, extra layers came out. Women used head coverings they could pull forward to shield their faces, while men wrapped linen strips around their necks. These were not decorative accessories, but essential armor against tiny flying tormentors. Children received extra care since they seemed to attract mosquitoes more easily due to their softer skin and sweeter scent. Youngsters often wore small hats with bits of netting or fabric hanging around the face for extra protection. They looked more like miniature beekeepers than playful children, but it worked. This was medieval pest control in its purest form. Fabric density mattered too. Modern studies confirm that mosquitoes can bite through materials up to about 1.2 millimeters thick. Medieval people did not measure fabric so precisely, but they learned from experience. Tightly woven linen was far better at keeping mosquitoes out than loosely woven wool, even though wool was heavier. Laundry day became a vital chore during mosquito season since unwashed clothing attracted more insects. It makes modern complaints about folding laundry seem minor by comparison. At night, many peasants slept with thin cloths draped over their faces or under simple bed canopies made from old linen sheets. These early mosquito nets were not elegant, but served their purpose, making sleep far more comfortable. The canopy bed, often seen today as a luxury, was originally invented to avoid waking up covered in itchy red bumps. In swampy regions, certain communities even developed special evening headgear for mosquito protection. People wore loosely woven hats with wide brims that prevented mosquitoes from flying directly toward their faces. The unique weave made it difficult for insects to land, providing an added layer of safety. Gloves, usually a luxury reserved for the upper class, became practical items in mosquito-heavy areas. Peasants improvised simple gloves from leftover fabric, rough but functional, protecting their hands while working outdoors. Color choices also played an unexpected role. People noticed that mosquitoes seemed to prefer darker fabrics. Modern science supports this, showing that mosquitoes are attracted to dark colors because they trap heat and stand out more clearly against the horizon. By switching to lighter clothing, medieval people unknowingly reduced their risk of being bitten. Of course, extra layers in the summer heat brought new challenges. Overheating and fatigue were constant dangers. But for most peasants, the discomfort was a small price to pay for avoiding swarms of biting insects. Even now, if given the choice, most would likely agree that sweating through their clothes was far better than becoming dinner for mosquitoes. Some lessons never fade with time. Although clothing offered solid protection, medieval peasants soon discovered that timing was just as important. Careful observation revealed that mosquito behavior followed patterns, and understanding these rhythms became another layer of defense. Medieval villagers lacked modern gadgets like mosquito traps or electric zappers, but they possessed something equally valuable: patience and observation. Over many generations, they noticed when and where mosquito bites were most common, and they adjusted their daily habits accordingly. One of their greatest insights was realizing that mosquitoes followed a predictable routine. These insects were not active at the same level throughout the day. Instead, they had specific feeding peaks, and anyone wise enough to stay indoors during those times could avoid countless bites. Dawn and dusk were the most dangerous hours, as cooler air and still winds made ideal conditions for mosquito feeding frenzies. Farmers referred to these periods as the biting hours and planned indoor tasks to avoid them whenever possible. Parents would warn children to return home before the mosquitoes began their nightly hunt, an early form of curfew long before clocks were common. This understanding became part of everyday life. Agricultural schedules were built around mosquito behavior. Harvest work often took place during the blazing midday hours, when mosquitoes were least active due to the heat and dry air. The midday sun could be exhausting, but it was still better than battling swarms of hungry insects at dawn or dusk. Interestingly, it is now known that only female mosquitoes bite, and that they are most active during these transition times. Studies confirm their activity levels can rise up to 5-fold during dawn and dusk compared to midday. Medieval farmers might not have understood the science behind it, but they certainly recognized the pattern through generations of itchy trial and error. Mealtimes also shifted to fit this rhythm. In many communities, dinner was eaten earlier in the summer to avoid the evening mosquito surge. Once the sun set, outdoor chores were wrapped up quickly before retreating indoors to safety. This same principle influenced public events as well. Markets, fairs, and even weddings often took place during the day, when sunlight discouraged mosquito activity. When someone asked, "When does the festival begin?" the answer was simple: once the sun climbs high enough that the mosquitoes go quiet. That was medieval timekeeping in its most practical form. People also noted that warm, windless nights brought more mosquitoes, while breezy evenings provided relief. When a strong wind swept through, families took advantage of it, working or relaxing outdoors until the air stilled again. Windy weather became the perfect opportunity for tasks like washing laundry or salting meat for storage. Seasonal timing mattered just as much. In temperate regions, people knew that mosquitoes followed yearly cycles. The first warm days after spring rains signaled the start of mosquito season, while late summer's drying ponds and streams brought some relief. Those living near swamps or marshes became skilled at predicting mosquito blooms. They learned to monitor rising water levels and recognized that a few days after flooding, swarms would appear. This knowledge allowed them to gather extra herbs, store smoke-producing fuel, or plan indoor chores before the worst days arrived. Their version of a weather forecast might sound something like, "Tuesday good chance of getting bitten to pieces if you hang laundry after 4. Despite the humor, it worked. Knowledge was passed carefully from one generation to the next. Elders taught young people when to stay inside and when it was safe to go out. This shared wisdom became part of the cultural fabric of rural life. While their timing strategies might seem simple compared to modern mosquito control techniques, they were highly effective. By avoiding outdoor activity during mosquito feeding hours, peasants could reduce bites by more than half. When combined with their other defenses, reducing standing water, growing repellent plants, wearing protective clothing, and masking body odor with smoke, these timing habits completed a surprisingly effective system of mosquito management. It was proof that clever observation could outsmart nature's most persistent pest. If it meant fewer bites, most medieval people gladly traded a few hours of scorching labor under the noon sun for an itch-free night. Together, these simple yet ingenious practices, clean water management, protective herbs, thick garments, and perfectly timed routines, allowed medieval communities to endure life in mosquito-filled landscapes. To them, mosquitoes were not just annoying pests. They were dangerous carriers of sickness, capable of bringing devastation to entire villages.